Mwiko mwiku mwiku mwingi wa Kamĩrĩĩthũ mutiuke tunyitane.
I am Esther Kute. I was born in Nakuru town, but I grew up in Eldoret town. And most of the time in my childhood, we were living between the two towns. So I come from the western side of Kenya, the Luo Nyanza. It's very flat. And usually when you stand, you can see very, very far. And when it rains, it's flat. During the colonial era, there was that sort of segregation and our grandparents being taken into sort of camps, concentration camps, I think. And we call it reserve, you know. So we are going to reserve. If we're in Eldoret and we are going to my grandparents' place, we say we are going to reserve. There's a general history of our parents in our generation. So I think the history for my parents is that my father, for example, I feel like from his stories, he makes it sound like he grew up in really abject poverty. There was a bitter struggle. From my mom's side, there were many. I think up to now, we are consistently meeting new relatives from my mother's side, and we're like, oh wow, oh God. My father's side was very heavily based in religion, Christianity. My grandpa started even a church, was one of the founders of the churches at home in Kisumu, in Nyakach. They started a school, I think Magunga School, and they were, so they were like founders of the community, in a way. And it was really steeped in Christianity. So up to now, my dad is very, I think he's even a deacon in church now. Yes, he became a deacon after he retired from work. My dad is an engineer, but agricultural engineer. My mother is an agricultural researcher. Yes, so it's funny because as we were growing up, my parents were always working somewhere else while we were living in Eldoret mainly. And then they come home and then go again, come back home, like that. I loved Eldoret. I think Eldoret was this really gorgeous small town, very clean. I don't know why I always remember Eldoret as a really clean, pristine town. When you're watching a movie and you see those perfect towns that are like cottages and clean and just perfect, Eldoret felt like that to me. Especially when we were growing up, it felt very upper middle class, I think. So there was that kind of, interaction that we had. Even the people we were going to school with, these were people from upper middle class families, wealthy families, Nakuru was interesting because it was more like a holiday destination. We would drive there in a car. My parents used to put mattresses in the back of the Peugeot. Peugeot at some point was the car everyone was driving in Kenya. And you had the longer version of it, the 504. They would put mattresses in the back and we'd all sleep there and play around, wave at drivers and matatu drivers. So we'd always go there on our school holidays because my mother was living mainly in Nakuru at that point. I didn't form much of a connection with Nakuru. I just remember we lived next to the barracks. It was also really beautiful. It was a very nice town. So while growing up in Eldoret, anytime my dad would take us to, let's say, the doctor, he would take us then to Bata to buy shoes to make you feel better. Or let's say it's a Sunday, you go to church, and then after church you stop by Bata to get something. Of course, when you're going back to school, if your parents agree to buy you a new pair of shoes, you're so happy. You go to Bata, you fit them, and then you sleep with them in your bed until you wear them to school. Someone was telling me, I think it was my dad, I cannot be sure, but they were saying you'd be in the store in Bata and you'd be saying, but why, how is this done? Maybe I can make it better like this, And I cannot remember because I was a child at that time. Yeah, but I used to make those kind of comments to the sales assistants in the shops, Yeah. So, well, I go to school. I chose to do design. Then this lecturer of mine, one day she calls me in my second year and she says, Esther, there's this internship project that we are going to do, a collaboration between the school at the University of Nairobi, School of Creative Arts and Design, and an Italian NGO called Terra Nova. I was attached to Duakali artisans who are tailors. So one was in Kawangware, 56, and then one was near Kikuyu, Wangige. And the idea was, as a design student, designer, teach them the design process, collaborate on working on the products they're already doing in such a way that now they can have a better understanding of the target customer expanding their market network in such that they can be able to sell more of their products. And it was a really good project. Like, we were taught so much, And I always say that's the time I fell in love with design. So I think by doing that, it sort of started my journey towards Bata, because I had a classmate who went immediately after school to work in Bata as an interior designer. And one day he sent information to all of us, oh, Bata is looking for designers. And I was like, oh, wow, cool. You should apply. So I applied. They took me in as a creative designer training, which means I was going to be taught how to design shoes, how to work in the product development department, And at that time, the department was actually rather small. It was just the manager who I was reporting to, the PD manager, and the sample makers. I had to learn a lot quickly. I was working with men who have been in the footwear industry for 30 years. They have immense experience. These are French men, Italian men, Asian men, and they know everything. I'm just learning, and I have to make sure that what we are designing is being produced to run in the factory, because Bata has factories in Limuru where they produce shoes, and a lot of shoes, actually up to 30 million pairs of shoes a year, you can imagine. So this is me running this within joining Bata, because I joined in 2010, mid-June 2010. By 2016 December, had been appointed as the product development manager in charge of design at Bata. The first woman, first Black person, first African, first Kenyan, youngest, actually. At that time, I was the youngest senior manager to be in the company, actually, Well, I would say maybe two things. One, I've been learning about design in class, so I've never really implemented it in a practical, real-life situation. I'm going to this person who has this experience, and as they're cutting the patterns, I'm there cutting with them. They're showing me you can even do it this way, You can, when you choose the fabric you're going to use, you have to choose it in this aspect, When you're cutting, you cut across, not along, or this piece goes that way, And the other thing is, a lot of us have this perception that people in the Juakali sector, people in the informal sector don't know what they're doing, and they're failures in life, There's always that in the back of a lot of people's mind. And I think I sort of had that stereotype with me. So going to these guys, I realized, oh my God, this guy went to university. Like, oh, he did? So why are you doing this? He's like, because I enjoy it, I love it. But also a life happened, And you can start seeing these guys have so much experience, They know what they're doing, the skills. I think it's in the Texans who say they have skin in the game, They have skin in the game, these guys. They know what they're doing. They might not have the what we would call theoretical aspect of it, but they understand if you cut across, along instead of across, it's going to stretch. And when it stretches, the shape is going to be out of place. And this is not going to be a good dress. It won't fit the person you're making for. You can see that kind of detail. And then just collaborating. It even influenced how I worked at Bata. Because when I started working at Bata, I was among the people who were always pushing for collaborations with artisans. So for me, my life at Bata became a very collaborative experience. We were doing projects with guys from Uganda, guys from abroad, Yeah, so I feel Terra Nova, the project, sort of opened my eyes to how you need to work as a designer. You're not concentrating only on the turnover or money, but you're concentrating on changing lives, actual lives, I would understand why someone would say this, because if you're working as a casual worker in the factory and I'm working at a senior management level, it's very different because I'm forced to look at the overall picture. I'm basically running the company only from the design aspect, I need to understand the customer. I need to understand the sourcing, I need to understand the value chain across the board, So I can understand why they would see it that way. For me, as a senior manager looking over, it's because we want you to be the best in that one operation. Because in manufacturing, we charge per second or per minute. If something goes wrong in 1 minute, we are losing millions of shillings or dollars, Yeah. So if an operator or a casual worker does not know what they're meant to do, and very well, the way you're saying the machine is not running smoothly, something goes wrong, and it affects the future aspect of the process. And what happens is, it's a small mistake here, it leads to a bigger issue at the end. The workers in the factory that I was able to interact with one-on-one, we would discuss, and I'd always be like, why are you limiting yourself to this? This is just a start. Yeah. For me, my experience with working with those Jua Kali artisans is that these were people who are business people running their businesses. The only thing is now we were bringing in structure. The worker at Bata, on the other hand, is coming into an organization that is extremely structured. Bata has one of the most impressive standard operating procedures. So you're coming in with your own different, what are they called? The things that are inspiring you or driving you. There are those who come in because this is an environment where they will grow and it will launch them into something bigger. Bata builds estates around their factories. So you work in the factory, you live in the housing. The housing is like just 5 minutes walk from the factory, you know. You would have the social amenities. So there's a Bata school, a Bata clinic, the Bata club, a social club like where we are right now actually. So there's even a tennis court, a basketball court. There's a mini golf area where we could do like 3 holes. I think there are 3 holes where you could just putt around, you know. Yeah. So that's the kind of environment Bata would create. It was open for every Bata employee. In fact, like I think I told you about, there's a time Bata even had the Bata Bullets, which was a football team. These were really open for anyone to use. There are 3 estates. One estate is where mostly the casual workers would work. Houses together, you know. It's like when you're going down a street and one house, next house like that, yeah. Open. So that's estate 3. Estate 2 was the one in the middle for middle managers, you know, middle level managers. And again, still open, so you not necessarily have your own compound, but there's space. The beauty about it is there's green space, there's trees and all this, you can play and all that. But then the house is slightly bigger, a bit better, yeah. And then you'd have estate 1. So there's 1A, 1B. 1A was now for before you become a senior manager, you have your own compound, better finishing, wooden floors, you know, nice. And then you'd have estate 1A, where now the leaders of the company would stay. And the house is in a huge compound in itself. Of course, the finishing again, very nice, wooden floors and all this. I actually think casual workers were not offered housing. Yeah, you'd have to be a permanent worker or on contract basis, yes. So they would live in the Limuru town. One thing I noticed about the workers at Bata is a lot of them lived in the area around Bata, so in Limuru town. So this was already their homes, like their parents lived there or their grandparents lived there, you know. Yeah, so I came to realize quite a lot of people already were living in their homes, you know. I was surprised to learn quite a number of people, those you would even consider at a lower level, had already constructed their own houses. So that was impressive to see. Yeah, but of course there are those who would be forced to live in a lower, you know, a bit of a lower end housing because of the salary of a casual laborer. Yeah. Well, yes, I think there was that issue of the company having a lot of foreigners leading the organization. But over time, of course, there's been a bit of a shift, and not just in Bata, I think across the board. Yeah? So for me, I do feel I was extremely supported. In fact, I remember the managing director I worked with, an Italian man, Mr. Alberto Enrico. And I feel that was extreme support for me, because if I'd worked with someone who was more cautious, who was not allowing me to do the things that I should do, I probably would not have moved as fast as I could have. He came in with the mentality that we need more Africans, we need more Kenyans in these positions, you know. Yeah. And that was beautiful to watch, at least from my side. I used to think, I like to see this, you know. But you have to admit, of course, it was a global shift. It's not just in Bata. Globally, there's been a shift in, we want more representation in whichever spaces that we are in. For example, when I became a senior manager, one of the first things I decided I have to do, because it had always been on my mind, is supporting design students or emerging designers in Kenya, because I had quite a bit of challenges when I was coming up, and I thought I'm at a position where I can influence this, so why not? So we started the Bata Designers Apprentice, and we can choose from University of Nairobi, and then there's the Technical University of Kenya, and we can have an apprenticeship program with them. The students had designed shoes, so they were exhibited in a fashion show, So we invited Biko Zulu, the writer, so he's teaching the designers how to write their stories in a way that is compelling. It's like, oh wow. And they were given cash awards, and we had media coming in, writing stories about them. Well, I feel like changing the politics in Africa is extremely hard. There's a lot of external influence. There's a lot of vested interests also. The problems Africa face are not necessarily problems that Africans created. They're problems created by external forces, allowing systemic, disillusionment, systemic chaos, or, disorganization. So for me, the other thing that worries me about this decolonization and the fact that we are now representing, there's this misconception that if you're paying someone from Africa, you need to pay them less than someone from abroad. Why? Who told you I did not go to school and paid school fees and it was expensive? Who told you I did not spend nights to learn what I'm learning now? If I can work as well or even better than someone from America, from Europe, why are you paying me less? So that is what is frustrating about organizations. In terms of policy, labor policies should look at such kind of things. I cannot discredit the experiences of what people had before. It's sad. When you think about colonialism, it's such a sad thing, and it happened just recently. There are people who experienced it who are still alive, So we are just lucky. Like for me, I always say I'm just lucky that I was born at this time. Otherwise, if I was just unlucky a bit and I was born in the wrong year, I would have been suffering the same thing. Instead, I ended up becoming a senior manager. So in a way, it's a bit of luck. Completely out of my control. The future of Bata is interesting because we are in technological innovation is happening. More organizations are manufacturing footwear, So I would say maybe more competition is happening. We are more aware about footwear options available. As much as Bata is what they are known for, they are very diversified. They do a lot of many other things apart from just Bata. They even support organizations that you'd think are their competitors, for example. I think a lot of organizations are trying to also shift into this customization, And Bata is a mass manufacturer, so customization is extremely hard for them. And one of the main things about this system is how to incorporate mass manufacturing and customization together. I want shoes to be designed this way, I'm in this company, I want you to brand our shoes with our logo or something like that, or a person with disability. I never felt that there were fewer women. The only thing I noticed is, of course, when the higher you go, the less women you find. In my personal experience, basically growing up, coming up, going into meetings, I would always have meetings with the cabinet secretaries and all. Most of the time, I would always be the only woman there or two women there. And as much as we are saying that there are more women, you tend to find there are not really many women, especially in positions of making decisions that matter. As much as women are being appointed to positions of power, they're appointed at a point where something is... They take the blame. Once the blame has been taken, man is appointed. Wow, I was actually shocked. I didn't know this existed. I was like, what? A theater in Limuru? And I feel at this point it's becoming even more important for these discussions to be had, for monuments of remembrance of the things that happened to be set up, for education to be done in such a way that the history is not distorted. What we thought was correct is not correct. The people who we thought were fighting for us, our independence, not, which is unfortunate. So it's extremely important for us to have that space within Limuru. I think it's even very important for people to know it exists, for it to be ingrained into the Bata culture somehow, ingrained into the Limuru town culture somehow. reparations need to be paid. Because colonialism, as you said, was extraction of manpower, of resources, of history. It was horrible if you think about it. And unfortunately, there's always that feeling of when people speak about colonialism, I noticed people start saying, this thing happened, can't you just let go and forget? How do you expect someone to forget? In fact, larger numbers of black people died as a result of colonialism and slavery. So reparations, in one way or another. I would not know if we want to hold the individual companies liable, or we want to hold the country liable, So I don't know, was Bata coming in to be the colonialist, or was it the British, for example, who are sending them to Kenya to take over territory? You see my point? Yeah, so I feel, for me, my thinking would be, if this is done in a way that is organized and towards one target, it becomes easier than small groups trying to target small different institutions. Yeah. You have to admit, this is not something people are proud of. So a lot of people would not want to openly sort of associate with the history that was so dark. So I would understand that point of view, but I would feel having courage to sort of now face that history and try to make better would show immense growth for an organization like that. If you look at Kenya, a lot of companies benefited from colonialism and enslavement of people for cheap labor and things like that. So ideally, my thinking would be, if I was someone in a position to change this, I would approach it from a point of view of things are changing in the world, make good on whatever is happening. Yeah. For those who were affected as a result of working in Bata at that time, for me, the advice, come together, collaborate. Collaboration is powerful. Collaborate, figure out how you can find a way to work out this,
Mwingi wa Kamĩrĩĩthũ mũtiũke tunyitane moko tuthondeke itũra. Mwĩkũ